I'd say the main thing that is interesting about the atopic march is that we now know that the atopic march is primarily driven by the atopic dermatitis. So antigens in your environment, food proteins, pollens, all that kind of stuff. If your immune system gets introduced to them transmucosally, so via you breathing them in or consuming them, your immune system becomes tolerant of them. And we assume that's because you're right from a kind of a teleologic anthropomorphic perspective. If you're breathing it in or you're eating it, it's not harmful to you. It's just kind of a random exposure. Your immune system shouldn't react to it. However, if those antigens, which they're getting on everybody's skin, if you have atopic skin that's letting them penetrate through your stratum corneum and get to the cutaneous immune system, when you get initial exposure via the cutaneous immune system, now you become allergic to things. So the reason that little kids get food with atopic derm, get food allergy, and then they grow out of it is because their aim gets better. Whenever they're smearing it all over their face and eating it, they're getting transcutaneous exposure, becoming allergic to those foods. As they hit around 4 or 5 and their aim gets better, they're not getting food on their skin anymore. Now the predominance of exposure becomes transmucosal, and they become tolerant of the food, of the proteins that they used to be allergic to whenever they were getting all the transcutaneous exposure. Same thing tends to happen with the airborne proteins, that as they grow out of their atopic dermatitis, which happens later than better aim, as they grow out of their atopic dermatitis and they're getting transmucosal exposure, they start to be tolerant of it. And so we'll often see little kids grow out of their asthma as well. And it's just really interesting that we now know that if we can keep them from having bad atopic dermatitis as a little kid, they're less likely to get bad atopic dermatitis, to have significant atopic comorbidity. The other thing that's interesting about this is it's now been shown that using moisturizer prophylactically from birth does not help, right? And that's a really interesting finding. A lot of experts out there thought that it really would. I truly don't know what they were thinking. It always seemed pretty ridiculous to me that using moisturizer from childhood on would work. The one thing we do know probably does help now is increasing ultraviolet exposure. So it is very possible at this point that the atopic epidemic has been driven by the advice to protect children against non-burning sun exposure. I am a believer that children should be getting as much non-burning sun exposure as possible because we have relatively good evidence now that non-burning sun exposure is a significant protective factor against atopic dermatitis development.